Chapter 1. The Contract. Kai stood on the bridge of the Orion, his eyes scanning the starry expanse outside the ship's windows. The hum of the engine was a constant companion, but today it felt different, heavier. The crew had gathered around the table, their usual banter absent. Today wasn't just another salvage job. "All right, team," Kai said, his voice cutting through the silence. "We've got a new contract. It's a big one, so listen up." The crew leaned in, their attention shifting. They were used to scrounging for scrap, debris from abandoned ships, broken satellites, or anything of value in the cold void of space. They worked fast, took what they could, and got out. But this job had a different edge to it. It wasn't just about salvage anymore. Kai slid a holographic display onto the table. The image of a large space station flickered to life in the center. A sleek utilitarian structure surrounded by an array of satellites and communication arrays. "This is the Horizon," Kai continued, pointing at the image. "They've hired us for a critical mission. There's a debris field heading straight for them. Big one. Estimated collision in less than 2 days." The crew exchanged looks, some eyebrows raised, others already calculating their cut. "We're clearing a path for them?" Juno, the ship's mechanic, asked. Her voice was always full of curiosity, but also a healthy dose of skepticism. "Not just clearing it. We're diverting the debris," Kai said, tapping a few commands into the display. "The station doesn't have the resources to deal with it on their own. Too much junk in orbit. Their shields won't hold if that field hits." "Sounds like a routine job," Ben, the navigator, chimed in. "We divert, we get paid. Simple enough." But there was something in Kai's tone, something that made the crew pause. "It's not that simple," he said. "The junk is valuable. It's not just trash we're dealing with. There's tech out there, high-end stuff, government contracts, advanced weaponry. This could be one of the biggest hauls we've ever pulled in." The room fell silent. Everyone knew that the Orion wasn't just a junker ship. They'd made their name by finding the stuff others overlooked. The technology buried in space, abandoned by the corporations or governments who had no use for it anymore. "How much are we talking?" Juno asked, her tone now tinged with the excitement of a treasure hunt. Kai glanced at the others. "The station has a lot riding on this. We divert the junk, we clear a path. They pay us handsomely. But there's a catch." Ben leaned forward, his interest piqued. "What's the catch?" "They need us to help with the salvage. The stuff in that field. It's not just debris. There's a chance we're going to find something worth far more than the payout for the diversion. If we pull this off, it could change everything for us." The crew exchanged knowing glances. This wasn't just a mission anymore. It was an opportunity. Kai glanced at the comm screen. "I've already been in touch with their lead engineer, Rhea. We're meeting her tomorrow to go over the plan. She'll be the one running things from their end." A brief flicker of something passed through Kai's mind. The woman's voice on the comms had sounded professional, efficient, maybe a little too efficient. But there was something else there, too. He couldn't quite place it yet. "All right, gear up," Kai said, standing tall. "We're heading out to the Horizon. Get ready to work." As the crew filed out of the room, Kai stared at the display of the station for a moment longer. This job was more than it appeared. The stakes were higher than they'd been in a long time, and with Rhea in the mix, things were about to get complicated. Chapter 2. Docking at the station. The Orion shuddered as it approached the Horizon, the massive space station that floated against the backdrop of distant stars, a sprawling hub of activity and technology. Kai stood at the helm, his fingers steady on the controls. Behind him, the rest of the crew was getting ready for what could be the biggest job they'd ever pulled. The station loomed large, the rotating ring of its docking bay opening like a mouth ready to swallow them whole. "Approaching docking bay," Ben, the navigator, called from behind Kai. "Prepping for entry." Kai gave a sharp nod, eyes fixed on the station. They had a small window to get this job done, and if they didn't, the Horizon would be nothing more than a floating wreck, and the junk they'd salvaged would be worth nothing. The tension was palpable. It wasn't just the debris field that had them all on edge, but the clock ticking down. Juno and the others secured their gear, checking over their equipment one last time. There wasn't a lot of time for idle chatter. The crew had worked plenty of these salvage missions, but this was different. The stakes were higher. The junk field wasn't just trash. It was a treasure trove of potentially dangerous, valuable technology that could change everything. The Orion slowly settled into the station's docking bay, a soft thud signaling their arrival. Kai's breath was steady as he powered down the ship's systems, but a hint of excitement still pulsed in his veins. He wasn't sure if it was the mission or the promise of something bigger that kept his heart racing. The hatch opened with a hiss, and the crew made their way toward the airlock. The horizon was alive with motion, its sleek corridors bustling with engineers, scientists, and station personnel. Kai's eyes scanned the faces, all of them purposeful, all of them working under pressure. They had less than 2 days to deal with the incoming debris. It was going to take every bit of skill they had, and maybe more. A voice echoed down the hall before they even reached the station's operations center. "You must be the Orion crew." Kai turned to see a woman standing at the entrance, her posture straight and confident. She was in a station jumpsuit, her dark hair pulled back in a neat ponytail, and her eyes were sharp, assessing the crew in one quick sweep. Her gaze landed on Kai, and something flickered between them, not enough to read, but enough to notice. "Rhea?" Kai asked, his tone questioning but polite. "That's me," she replied, a slight smile tugging at her lips. "Lead engineer for the Horizon." She extended a hand, and Kai shook it firmly, noting how steady her grip was. There was a quiet strength in her presence, something that commanded attention without trying. "Rhea, this is Juno, Ben, and the rest of the crew," Kai introduced, gesturing to the others. "We're here to help divert the junk." "We'll need more than help," Rhea said with a dry smile. "But we'll make do." She stepped aside to let them enter, motioning toward the central operations table where a large holographic display of the debris field awaited them. As Kai took his place at the table, he couldn't help but notice how efficient Rhea was. She quickly began running through the systems they'd be using to track the debris, pointing out critical areas of focus and the parts of the station that were vulnerable to damage. Her voice was calm, precise, a true professional. The more Kai listened, the more he realized how much she knew. This wasn't just a job for her. This was her domain, and she was in control. "Here's where we'll focus the bulk of the diversion efforts," Rhea said, highlighting key sections of the debris field on the display. "You'll need to be fast. We can't afford to lose any more time." Kai nodded, the sense of urgency sharpening in him. Rhea's presence, her focus, it all seemed to add another layer of pressure. She was smart, sharp, and already in command, a force to be reckoned with. As the briefing continued, Kai couldn't ignore the subtle spark between them, a connection that felt undeniable even as they remained focused on the task. Their professional chemistry was palpable, and Kai couldn't help but wonder what would happen when the job was done. But that thought was for later. Right now, they had a station to save. Chapter 3. The Junk Field. The Orion cut through the darkness of space, its thrusters humming as it approached the debris field. Kai stood at the helm, his eyes narrowing as the field came into view. The field stretched out before them, a chaotic jumble of abandoned satellites, derelict ships, and broken fragments of technology. What had once been useful was now scattered, drifting in every direction. The scope of it was overwhelming, more than they had anticipated. "Looks like we're diving into the deep end," Ben muttered from the navigation console, his fingers flying over the controls as the ship navigated through the field. Kai gave a low hum in response, his mind already calculating their next move. The debris was dense, with massive chunks of twisted metal floating in unpredictable orbits. They had to navigate carefully. One wrong move, and the Orion could be tangled up in the mess. Juno, the ship's mechanic, was already in the cargo hold, running checks on the equipment. "Everything's in order," she called out over the comm. "But we'll need to be quick. I don't like the looks of some of this debris." Kai looked out the viewports, his gaze shifting between the wreckage and the station's faint silhouette in the distance. They were on a tight deadline, and the space station was still on a collision course with the debris field. They couldn't afford any mistakes. "All right, let's get to work," Kai said, rallying the crew. "We start pulling whatever we can, focus on the valuable tech, and stay sharp." The crew suited up and began to deploy in the Orion's salvage pods, moving through the debris with practiced efficiency. As they sifted through the wreckage, the pieces of scrap started to show their value. There were old drones, disused spacecraft components, and crates filled with undelivered supplies that had been lost in the chaos of the space lanes. But it was the tech that caught their attention. "Got something here!" Juno called, her voice crackling over the comm. "Looks like a communications array, maybe military grade. This could be worth a lot." Kai's heart skipped a beat. "Hold on to it. We're not here for a shopping spree, but that's a good find." As they worked, more pieces of valuable tech came into view. A data core that had been jettisoned from an old research station, a set of high-capacity batteries, and even a military-grade plasma cutter. Every time they pulled something useful, the urge to take more grew. The Orion's cargo hold began to fill up rapidly, and the sense of urgency in the crew was palpable. But the clock was ticking. Kai couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking a fine line between treasure hunters and reckless fools. The junk could be worth a fortune, but only if they finished the job in time. He glanced at the station, distant, yet still dangerously close. "Rhea, status update," Kai said into his comms. Rhea's voice came through clear, calm as ever. "You're doing great. Keep an eye on that large piece of debris on your left. It's on a collision course with the station. We don't have much time." Kai nodded, already planning their next move. "Copy that." Despite the mounting pressure, he couldn't help but admire Rhea's steady command. She was guiding them through the chaos with a confidence that he found reassuring. It was clear she knew exactly what needed to be done, and her level-headedness only made Kai respect her more. The debris field was proving to be a gold mine, but Kai knew the real challenge was still ahead. With Rhea's guidance, they had to clear the way and make sure the junk didn't become their final mistake. Chapter 4. A Hidden Treasure. The Orion drifted slowly through the wreckage, the crew working efficiently to gather whatever valuable tech they could find. The debris field was full of surprises. Some valuable, others barely worth the effort. But as they picked through the twisted metal and fractured satellites, they came across something unusual. "Hey, I've got something here," Juno's voice crackled through the comms. "This isn't like the usual junk. It's embedded in a wreck, but I can feel it's intact." Kai turned toward her pod, heart pounding. "What is it?" Juno's face appeared on the comm screen, her brow furrowed. "It's an old data core, maybe even military grade. Looks like it was jettisoned from a ship during a battle or some kind of emergency." The rest of the crew gathered around her, curiosity piqued. They'd found plenty of useful components, but this was different. "Is it functional?" Kai asked. "I'm not sure yet," Juno replied, her fingers already at work on the pod's interface. "But it's sealed tight. I can't access it fully without cracking it open." Kai felt a spark of excitement. This wasn't just random junk anymore. This could be worth far more than any of them had expected. "Be careful," Kai warned, glancing at the rest of the crew. "Whatever's in there, we need to know exactly what it is before we pull it in." The seconds felt like hours as Juno worked. Finally, she spoke again, her voice laced with disbelief. "Okay, this is way beyond anything I expected. This data core isn't just for storing info. It's an AI system, integrated into the ship's mainframe. It's more like a blueprint for some kind of advanced weaponry or propulsion tech." Kai's mind raced. The implications were huge. "Is it worth anything?" Juno looked up, eyes wide. "It's worth a fortune, maybe even more. If this is what I think it is, whoever abandoned this stuff knew what they had. And if we're right, we could have a game-changing tech on our hands." Kai's gaze lingered on the floating debris field outside the pod. The stakes had just shifted. What was supposed to be a routine salvage job had now turned into something far more dangerous. This wasn't just a piece of junk, it was a treasure. But the timing gnawed at him. The debris field still loomed large, and the station was on a collision course. Every minute spent on salvaging meant less time to divert the junk. I don't like this, Kai muttered to himself, running a hand through his hair. This isn't just about the money anymore. We can't risk everything for this tech. The station is still our priority. But as he glanced at the crew, he saw the hunger in their eyes. They were already mentally counting the fortune this tech could bring. Kai was torn, caught between the temptation to secure a life-changing treasure and the weight of responsibility to save the station. Let's make sure this doesn't cost us the job, Kai said finally, his voice strained. Finish the salvage, but don't lose sight of the mission. He knew it wouldn't be easy. And as they continued their work, the question that loomed over him was harder to ignore. Could they really walk away from this treasure when it could change everything? Chapter 5. The Ethical Dilemma. Kai stood in the Orion's observation deck, watching the floating debris field as it drifted farther into the distance. His fingers tapped restlessly against the control panel. The data core was secure in the cargo hold, and with it, the weight of a decision that had become harder to ignore with each passing hour. He'd never anticipated that a simple salvage job would lead to this, a moral dilemma that could change everything. His comm buzzed and Rhea's voice came through, smooth and measured as always. Kai, we need to talk. Kai hesitated before responding. He knew exactly what this conversation was going to be about. I'm listening. I'm at the station's command center, Rhea continued. You're sitting on something big. That tech you found, it could bring in more than just credits. It could change the entire political landscape. If we expose it, the consequences will ripple out for years. He exhaled, his hand gripping the edge of the console. I know. That's what I'm worried about. But what's the alternative? We keep it hidden? Or worse, sell it to the highest bidder? There was a pause on the other end before Rhea responded, her voice softening. I'm not saying you should keep it. But the power this thing holds, it could make you a lot of enemies, Kai. You're not just dealing with salvage anymore. You're dealing with something that could be weaponized, used for something much bigger than all of us. I didn't ask for this, Kai muttered, more to himself than to her. I didn't come out here to play politics. We came for the junk. Now it's all changed. I know, Rhea replied. But you can't just ignore what you've got. You need to decide what kind of future you want. Kai felt a heavy weight settle on his shoulders. The temptation to hold on to the tech, to use it to secure a future for himself and his crew, was strong. But the consequences were massive. What could happen if this tech fell into the wrong hands? Or worse, what if it was misused? Rhea, Kai said, his voice low. I came out here because I wanted something better. Something that wasn't just scraping by, but this could cost us everything. There was a long pause before Rhea spoke again. I know. But you can't save the station and the galaxy in one go. You need to decide which is more important. Kai's gaze wandered back to the station in the distance. He wasn't the kind of person who easily bent to pressure, but this was different. This was about survival. And yet, in his gut, he knew that if they didn't act quickly, they might not get another chance to make things right. He turned away from the viewport and headed to the crew quarters. Inside, the team was gathered, tension thick in the air. Juno, Ben, and the others were standing around discussing the tech. It was clear. Some of them saw it only as a means to an end, a way to make their fortunes. But others, like Kai, were still unsure. We can't keep going like this, Kai said, his voice steady but firm. The station's still in danger. We need to focus on the mission, not on what's in that core. Are you saying we should just leave it? Juno asked, her tone sharp. I'm saying we finish the job we started, Kai replied. We can't afford to lose sight of the bigger picture. The room fell silent, and for the first time, the tension within the crew was palpable. Some wanted to strip the junk for all it was worth, while others, like Kai, wanted to stay true to their original goal. This wasn't just a salvage job anymore. It was a fight for integrity. And Kai wasn't sure who would win. Chapter 6. The Clock is Ticking. The Orion had settled into its orbit just outside the debris field, and the crew wasted no time in getting to work. The clock was ticking, and every passing minute brought them closer to disaster. The technology they'd found, the military-grade data core, was now the center of their efforts. But as Kai stood in front of the control panel, staring at the schematics of the debris field, he couldn't shake the nagging feeling that they weren't prepared for what lay ahead. "We need to make this work," Kai said to no one in particular, his voice tight with urgency. The debris field was massive, and the horizon was still on a collision course. If they didn't act fast, the station would be obliterated. Rhea's voice crackled through his comms. "Kai, I've got the blueprint. If we can reroute the power from the core to the station's defenses, it'll give us enough time to clear the junk. But we need to synchronize everything. One mistake, and we're toast." Kai stood up straighter. "Understood. I'll get the crew working on it." He glanced at the crew, gathered around the station's control room, their faces drawn with tension. Juno was at one console, tweaking the ship's systems to allow them to tap into the station's power grid. Ben was focused on the navigation console, plotting a course to divert the debris, and the rest of the team was preparing the salvage pods for the final push. As the crew got to work, Kai felt his attention drifting back to the comms channel, where Rhea was giving him live updates on her side of things. She sounded calm, controlled, but Kai knew that beneath that calm exterior, she was just as tense as he was. "Rhea, He paused, unsure how to phrase what was bubbling up inside him. "I don't know what's going to happen after this. We'll have to leave, you know? The mission's over and I know." Rhea cut in softly, her voice almost a whisper in the static. "But let's finish this first, Kai. We'll figure out the rest later." There it was again, that unspoken understanding between them. Even with everything on the line, even with the clock counting down, their growing connection felt undeniable. Every time they spoke, something between them shifted. A look, a lingering pause, a shared tension. Kai couldn't deny the pull he felt, but right now there was no time to explore it. Not when lives were at stake. They got to work. The first attempts to use the core's power were a mess. The data didn't sync up with the station systems the way they thought it would. The technology was alien, and though they could make sense of parts of it, it was clear they weren't fully in control. Juno cursed under her breath as another sequence failed. "Damn it, Kai, we're losing time." Kai's mind raced. "I know, just keep trying." Then, a near miss. A chunk of debris, large and fast-moving, veered off course and headed straight for the station. Ben shouted out a warning, and Kai ordered the crew to brace for impact. With a sharp jolt, the Orion rocked and alarms blared as the debris grazed the ship's outer hull. "Damn it!" Juno snapped. "We can't keep doing this!" Kai's heart raced. The station was seconds away from being hit by another piece of debris, and they were nowhere near ready. He turned to Rhea, his voice desperate. "We need more power, more control. Can we make it work?" There was a beat of silence. Then Rhea's voice cut through, calm as ever. "We'll figure it out. We have no choice." They had no choice. The crew was doing their best, but they were running out of time, and with every failed attempt, the pressure grew heavier. But Kai had never backed down from a challenge. Not now, not when everything was on the line. They would make it work, even if it cost them everything. Chapter 7. The Revelation. The crew had been working non-stop, trying to find a way to control the power within the data core. Each failed attempt only brought them closer to the realization that this tech was far more dangerous than they had initially thought. What had appeared to be a simple piece of valuable military-grade technology was proving to be something far more insidious. Kai sat at the central console, running through the data once again. His fingers trembled slightly as he examined the schematics. The core wasn't just storing information. It was part of a system that could trigger massive changes in the station's core systems. Worse, it seemed to be a key to a weaponized technology that had been abandoned long ago. "This can't be right," Juno muttered, her face pale as she stared at the readouts. "This tech, it's not just salvageable components. It's a weapon, a big one. And if we plug it into the station's systems without understanding it fully, we could trigger something catastrophic. Kai's stomach dropped. What do you mean, catastrophic? Think bigger than a simple explosion, she said. This thing was designed to destabilize entire fleets, whole stations, maybe even planets, and it's tied to the core power of the station. The realization hit Kai like a punch to the gut. If they used this tech improperly, the entire station could be wiped out in a chain reaction, its systems collapsing under the strain of a weapon they didn't even know how to control. The stakes had just escalated to a level that he hadn't fully comprehended. The crew continued to sift through the data, but the more they uncovered, the more they realized the depth of the danger. As they worked, Rhea's voice crackled over the comms, her usual calm tone laced with something darker. Kai, we need to talk. He swallowed, already knowing where this conversation was headed. I'm listening. The comms buzzed again before Rhea spoke. The Horizon's leadership knew about the potential dangers of this tech. They were never fully transparent with us, but it seems like they might have been hiding the real purpose of this core from the start. This wasn't just some old relic. This is part of a failed government experiment, and it's been sitting in the station's archives for decades. They kept it under wraps, probably hoping to use it when the time was right. Kai's mind raced. The Horizon's leadership had been playing a dangerous game. Rhea had suspected as much, but hearing it confirmed only added to the weight pressing on his chest. The tech they had uncovered wasn't just valuable. It was a Pandora's box, one that could very well destroy everything in its wake. Rhea, if we don't stop this, Kai started, but she cut him off. I know, but you need to understand something. Rhea's voice softened. I've been working with this leadership for years. I've seen the decisions they make. They'll use this tech if they can. They won't care what happens to the station or to you, Kai. It's all about control. Kai's heart ached. The pull between his loyalty to Rhea and his duty to the crew and the station was growing stronger. He could see it in her eyes, the conflict she faced in balancing what was right with what was necessary. I can't let them use this tech, Kai said firmly. If it means losing the treasure, then so be it. We need to focus on the mission. The station comes first. Rhea hesitated, a long pause settling between them. I'm with you, Kai, she said softly. Let's stop the collision. Together. Kai nodded, the weight of the decision settling over him. The tech would have to be left behind. It was time to focus on what mattered most, saving the station and its people. The temptation of treasure had to be pushed aside. He had already lost too much to let anything, or anyone, steer him from the right path now. Chapter 8. Betrayal. The hum of the Orion's engines was drowned out by the shouting that filled the command center. Kai stood in the middle of the chaos, his hands clenched into fists. Tension had been growing in the crew ever since they decided to abandon the treasure. Some members of the team, especially those who had come into this for the profit, were not ready to let go of the opportunity that the technology represented. And now it seemed their greed had reached a breaking point. We could be set for life! Juno's voice cut through the air, her face flushed with frustration. You can't honestly expect us to just walk away from this. We found something that could change everything, and you want to throw it away? For what? Some station that doesn't even know we're saving it? Juno, this isn't about the money, Kai said, his voice firm. He stepped closer, trying to calm the tension that was rising. This is about saving lives. We made a choice, and I'm not backing down. Neither am I, she shot back, her eyes narrowing. You're so busy trying to be the hero that you're ignoring the obvious. We can sell this. We'll be rich, Kai. Rich beyond anything we've ever dreamed of. Ben, standing by the navigation console, glanced over at Juno and then at Kai. He wasn't saying anything, but the look in his eyes made it clear where his loyalties now lay. The money was too tempting. The possibility of securing their future, of never having to scavenge again, was a lure none of them could resist. Before Kai could respond, he saw Rhea enter the room, her expression grim. She had been coordinating with the station's command, trying to stabilize their position as the junk field continued to drift closer. The brief moment of calm she had seemed to have lost as soon as she walked in. "What's going on here?" she demanded, her voice sharp. "They want to keep the tech," Kai said, his jaw tight. "They don't care about the mission anymore. They're willing to jeopardize everything. The station, our crew, for money." Rhea's gaze flickered between Juno and Kai. The weight of the situation was becoming clear. She stepped forward, trying to get a read on the crew. "Juno, this isn't just a piece of tech. It's dangerous. We can't afford to ignore the risks." Juno sneered. "And what do you know about risks, Rhea?" "The station's leadership has known about the danger, but they kept it all from us. You knew it too, didn't you? You knew what we were really dealing with, and you didn't say a word." Rhea flinched, the accusation landing harder than expected. She took a step back, her eyes flashing with a mix of guilt and anger. "I didn't know everything. The station's leadership, they hid a lot. I'm just as much a part of that as you are." The room fell silent, the weight of Rhea's admission heavy in the air. Kai's heart sank. Rhea had always been the steady force, the one he'd trusted to help him keep the crew together. But this was different. Her loyalty to the station had been questioned, and now she was caught between two worlds, the station that had employed her and the crew who had risked everything to save it. "I don't care who you work for anymore," Kai said, his voice low but filled with resolve. "You've made your choice. We're finishing this mission. And if you can't get on board with that, then you're out." Rhea looked at him, her eyes flickering with something unreadable. But she nodded, the decision made. "I'm with you, Kai. We finished the job. We stopped the collision." Kai turned to face the rest of the crew, his voice gaining strength. "The rest of you, if you want to get on board with this mission, then do it. Otherwise, you're off the ship." The room was silent, the crew divided. Kai had just taken a hard stand, and there would be no turning back. But he knew it was the right thing. They were all in this together, or they were not at all. "Let's move out," Kai ordered, his voice unwavering. "Time's running out." Chapter 9. The Final Countdown. The tension on the Orion was palpable. The debris field, once a distant threat, was now a glaring, deadly presence on the station's scanners. Every minute that passed brought the floating wreckage closer, and the clock was running out. Kai stood at the helm, his grip tight on the controls. His crew was scattered across the ship, working furiously to finalize their plan. "We've only got 15 minutes, Ben's voice echoed over the comms, a sharp reminder of how little time they had. "This debris isn't slowing down." Kai glanced over at Rhea, who was deep in conversation with Juno at one of the terminals. They had the technology now, the core they had salvaged, but using it to divert the junk was no simple task. They didn't fully understand how the technology worked, and each attempt to activate it had been met with failure. Still, there was no time left to second guess. "We've got to make this work," Rhea said, stepping up beside him, her expression resolute. "If we don't, the station will be destroyed." Kai nodded, his heart pounding. He looked at her, taking in the determination in her eyes. She had become more than just a colleague. There was something else now. The connection between them had deepened over the past few days, forged in the fire of shared risk and responsibility. Yet even in this moment, when everything was at stake, he couldn't deny the pull he felt. "I never thought this would be how we end up," Kai said quietly, his voice tinged with something more vulnerable than he intended. Rhea met his gaze, her eyes softening. "None of us did, but we're here now and we still have a chance." A long silence stretched between them, filled only with the hum of the ship's systems. The world outside the Orion seemed impossibly far away, reduced to nothing more than an ever-encroaching mass of metal and debris. "I can't imagine being anywhere else," Kai finally admitted, his voice low, almost to himself. "I thought this was all about the tech, the treasure, but I was wrong. I'm here because of you, Rhea, because we need to do this together." Rhea smiled faintly, but it was a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. She didn't respond immediately, but her hand brushed against his briefly. It was a subtle touch, but it meant more than anything they'd said. They both knew what it meant. There was no time to unpack it now, not while the station was still at risk, but the unspoken understanding between them hung in the air. They had to finish this. "We're ready," Rhea said, her voice snapping back to command. "We activate the tech now. We reroute the power to the station's shields. We need to redirect the debris, or it'll be too late." Kai nodded. "Let's do it." The plan was risky. They would need to align the salvage technology with the station's emergency systems. It was a delicate operation, one that required perfect timing and precision. Kai and Rhea worked together to pull the final adjustments. "Hold on," Rhea said, her fingers dancing over the terminal. The ship rumbled as the power surged. They could feel the ship's systems straining under the load. The debris was getting closer. Kai's pulse raced. "Now!" With one final command, the technology hummed to life. The power systems connected and the debris field slowly shifted, its trajectory veering off course. For the first time in days, there was a brief moment of silence. The countdown had ended, and the mission was complete. The horizon was safe. But for Kai and Rhea, the journey wasn't over yet. Chapter 10. The Aftermath. The Orion hovered just beyond the perimeter of the horizon, the debris field now safely diverted into deep space. The silence in the cockpit was deafening, the crew staring at the monitor, eyes wide with disbelief. The station was safe. The technology they'd salvaged had been used, not for profit or personal gain, but to save lives. Kai exhaled slowly, his shoulders relaxing for the first time in days. It had been touch and go, the power surges, the near misses. But they had done it. The mission was a success. "We did it," Ben said, his voice quiet with awe. Juno nodded, her expression one of reluctant relief. "But at what cost?" Kai turned away from the console, glancing at his crew. There had been sacrifices. They'd lost the valuable tech in the process, the technology they'd once dreamed of selling, the treasure they had thought would secure their futures. But it hadn't been about that. It never should have been. They had done the right thing, and that was worth more than any profit. "It doesn't matter," Kai said, his voice steady. "We saved the station. We did what needed to be done." As the Orion drifted toward the station for docking, Kai knew the consequences of their actions wouldn't be forgotten easily. The Horizon's leadership had acknowledged their bravery, offering token praise. But Kai couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to their reaction. They had hidden the true nature of the tech. Would they take credit for the crew's heroics? Would they sweep the truth under the rug? Kai didn't trust the leadership, but that didn't matter right now. They had done their part. Rhea's voice came through the comms, as calm and collected as ever. "Kai, we need to talk." She didn't need to say more. He knew the conversation was coming. After the Orion docked, Kai made his way through the station's narrow corridors to meet Rhea. Her usual poise was tinged with something softer now, something personal. She had changed. The mission had changed her. They stood in the docking bay, the hum of the station's life support systems buzzing around them. "You did it," Rhea said quietly, offering him a half smile. "So did you," Kai replied, his eyes meeting hers. "But we both know we couldn't have done it without each other." Rhea looked away for a moment, her thoughts clearly drifting. "You're right, but things are different now. I've been thinking a lot about what this mission really means, about the station, about me." Kai stepped closer, the words feeling heavier than usual. "And what does it mean?" She hesitated, then met his gaze. "I don't know. I'm not sure where I fit in anymore. The station's leadership. I've seen enough now to know they don't have the right priorities. Maybe it's time for me to find a new path. Maybe that path isn't here." Kai felt a pang of understanding. He hadn't expected anything to change overnight, but the weight of the decision was obvious in her eyes. "You'll find your way. I'm sure of it." Rhea nodded, her expression wistful. "And you'll keep leading. You've become something more, Kai. I see it. You're not just a scavenger anymore. You're a leader." They stood in silence for a long moment. The words unspoken were more than they could handle at the moment. Neither of them had a clear future ahead, but there was a bond between them now, stronger than either had anticipated. Finally, Rhea broke the silence. "I guess this is it then. The mission's over. I've got to go back to the station." Kai felt a sudden heaviness in his chest. "Yeah, I guess it is." She stepped closer, touching his arm briefly. "Take care, Kai. You'll do great things. I know it." With that, she turned and walked away, disappearing into the station. Kai watched her go, feeling the finality of the moment settle over him. The crew was already preparing the Orion for their next job, but Kai knew nothing would ever be the same. He wasn't the same. Neither was Rhea. They had changed each other, and though they didn't know what the future held, the bond between them would endure.